you say about forgiveness, especially when someone really hurt you badly and you know clearly they deliberately did it and they're not even remorseful about it, or even their remorse, you know, is just fake because they wanted to hurt you and they really hurt you badly. Somehow you may not be holding them in your heart, because sometimes if you have people grudgingly holding your heart, it's difficult to even pray.
Right.
But then, to totally forget what they have done is difficult. What would you say about that?
So there's two aspects to forgiveness.
Yes.
The first aspect is whether we desire harm for the person.
Okay.
And so when we hold a grudge against somebody, like you said,
Yes.
that's rejecting what God did for us. The reason I say that is, it's a parable where the king goes and he gives forgiveness to the guy who owes him 10,000 talents, which is like more money than you can imagine. Yeah. And he forgives that, and then that guy goes and beats the other servant to try to get his debt. And then the king says, I'm going to send the first one to the torturers until he pays the last cent. If we have to forgive others, because if we don't forgive others in our heart, then what that means is we don't have the right perspective on what God forgave us for. Because we get our life, we get our breath, we get food, we get everything that sustains us from God.
Yes.
And we rebelled against him.
That's correct.
And God forgave us. So because of that, when we look at what it cost God to forgive us was to send his son to die on the cross. His perfectly obedient son. And yet he was willing to do that to forgive us. So when we look at people's sins towards us, we need to be willing to forgive, or we haven't been forgiven. Because we've been forgiven so much more by God, for us to turn around and say that we're not going to forgive somebody else. It's because we've lost perspective on what it means that God has forgiven us. But the other aspect of forgiveness is not where you're holding a grudge, but where you're just saying, I'm going to ignore it and pretend like it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Right? Because we can think of it like a debt.
Yes.
Somebody borrows 100,000 naira from you, and you loan it to them, and then they say, well, forgive me. And you go, I forgive you, but you still have to pay back the 100,000 naira.
Yes.
But the point of that shouldn't be, I want my 100,000 naira back. Even there, the point should be, well, it's not good for him to just keep the money. Yeah. Because if he just keeps the money and doesn't pay back the debt, he's sinning, he's stealing. Exactly. Because a righteous man repays, is what the Proverbs say, right? I mean, it's a sign of righteousness.
Yes.
Wicked don't repay their debts, and righteous do.
Yes.
And so if you just forgive him and say, just ignore my debt, you're not being a blessing to him. So when people do wrong to you, it's important that you forgive them in the sense of not holding a grudge, not holding hatred in your heart towards them or bitterness in your heart towards them, because like you said, it affects your prayers, it affects everything. Holding that bitterness, I mean, that root of bitterness in your heart where you haven't forgiven them, I mean, it produces, I mean, the root of bitterness produces a tree of bitterness, and you become a bitter person, you're miserable.
That's correct.
So we have to forgive, but on the other hand, we don't have to just go, it's all gone, because that's usually not a blessing. So somebody who's done some wrong to us, we both forgive them, and we don't continue to hate them, but at the same time, we don't necessarily just go, I'm just going to forget it, because that's not a blessing to them, because they're going to do it to somebody else. So you're not blessing the other victims that they'll have, and you're not blessing them for not dealing with their sin.
Wow.
So we can forgive somebody without forgetting.
Okay.
And that's the right balance, is that we should forgive and not hold a grudge, but at the same time, if you loan somebody money and you even forgive it and say you don't need to pay it back, you should be really slow to loan them money again. Because that's just not. Exactly. Otherwise, all you're doing is teaching them this is a way to steal, is by telling them, I'm borrowing the money, I'm not stealing it, and they end up stealing it, and all you've done is trained a thief. You don't have the right to train a thief.
That's correct. And just to make more clear, I understand that very well. What about people that do same thing? You just forgive someone now, and then he do it again, and you forgive him, and he do it again. Like, if he has opportunity to do it, he will still do it. and you know it. For example, like I was talking to you about Peter Mohammed, he will go slander me just to be able to have favor. And from, someone that really, the situation we were in Nigeria. And then somehow it gets back to me and I confront him and he will go, I am sorry. Sometimes go on his knee, sometimes even with tears to say he's sorry. And then that very moment, immediately he leaves my place, he go to do more because there's opportunity for more, so he does more. He has done it 3 times.
Right.
And recently he called me after, slandering my name and put it on the internet and saying all manner of things that I know nothing about. And he knows most of those things I did help him rather than what he is really saying. He knows it very well. So he called recently and he's saying he's sorry. This is the 4th time, not the 3rd time. This is the 4th time.
Right. And so what we should, again, the first kind of forgiveness, how often should you forgive your brother? Well, Christ says 7 times 70
Wow,
times,
true.
so that's
Yeah.
490 times. So that's a bunch.
Yeah.
But at the same time, again, slanderers, they have their place in the lake of fire. I mean, slander is a serious, right? Satan was the slanderer from the beginning. And so, I mean, slander is not just some minor sin. Slander is trying to kill somebody by killing their reputation. It's actually in the category of do not murder. Slander is, because you're murdering their reputation instead of their physical body.
Yeah.
And so if you look at Deuteronomy, it's broken out and it's doing commentary on the law by law. And so if you look, slander falls under do not murder.
That's good.
And so it's a serious sin. But you are back to, when they say false things about me, rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, because this is how they treat prophets. And so you have to be, first of all, again, it doesn't mean you put him in a position where he can slander you again, because that's sinning towards him. And you should forgive him in your heart, but at the same time, you should mostly have pity for him. And here's why, right? Slanderers have their place in the lake of fire. You should have pity for him.
Wow.
It's really easy to go, but he's destroying my name,
Yes,
instead of going,
yes.
well, actually, he's destroying himself and not just his name. Because he can profess to be a Christian, he can say everything he wants, but slanderers are the sons of Satan. And if he's a slanderer, he has his place in the lake of fire.
Wow.
And so you should have pity for him. That's another way to give somebody forgiveness, is you think, Christ saved me from this.
True.
He died for me to rescue me, and this poor person, he has every expectation to spend eternity in hell.
Yes.
You should have sympathy for him.
Thank you. That's good to know. Yeah, that's helpful.